Come in, Ocean Sailor. Come in, Ocean Sailor.
The Ocean Sailor Podcast. Brought to you by Ocean Sailor Magazine and Kraken Yachts.
Well, hello and welcome to Ocean Sailor Podcast number 5 with me, Dick Durham, and with my co-skipper and chairman of Kraken Yachts, Dick Beaumont.
Yeah, hi everyone. We're a bit amazed, aren't we, Dick? We're already on number 5, but we've had some really great ones. I mean, the last two podcast episodes with Renee Tiramasen as our guest have been incredibly well received, and the podcasts are really starting to snowball now. So please do tell everybody about them. We're really sure that we've got something to interest you on this one as well.
Yeah, well, Rene was a surprise. I mean, he really did open up. I know he's a sort of a blunt, straight talker, you might say, but I didn't think he was going to reveal his innermost soul, but he did, because our next guest is Gerry Northwood, a hugely respected ex-naval man, runs a private company for providing security for yachts. Even governments and big ships through piracy areas, and he tells us all about that.
Well, I would say his company, Mast Securities, is the leading maritime security company in the world.
It would seem that way, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the listeners are going to be astounded because he's going to tell us a side of this whole piracy issue that I think the average Joe, certainly I didn't appreciate. No. The whole element that completed that role that he carried out and the elimination of the big piracy issue that he conducted. I mean, he's a top man, so we'll have him on. So Dick, let's call him up and
bring him on.
Bring him on.
We have with us today a very special guest, Gerry Northwood.
Good morning.
He's a former Royal Navy commander, and he is now the chairman of a company called MAST, which stands for Maritime Asset Security and Training. It's a company which involves, it's a leading risk management and security company. And the customers of this company include multinational companies, governments, and private yacht owners who are a little bit windy about entering pirate areas. So if you want a Gurkha on board, Gerry's the man to ask. But Gerry, perhaps we could start with your operation capturing pirates off Somalia, for which you were awarded the OBE, I believe. But when was that, Gerry?
It all started back in end of 2008, when the European Union asked the Maritime Battle Staff, the organisation I was working for in the Royal Navy, to set up the European Union Naval Force in London. And we put together a force of ships to go and patrol out in the Gulf of Aden and counter the Somali piracy problem that was running at the time. It was setting up that organization that allowed us to really put a military stamp on the whole issue, working very closely with the merchant navy organizations, with the commercial organizations, people like BIMCO, Intertanko, also working with the cruise liners. And then very shortly after all that started, in fact, some of the yacht organizations came to us as well. People like the Vasco da Gama, the Blue Water Cruise, asking whether we could help them in facilitating or advising on their trips across the Indian Ocean.
So prior to that then, Gerry, what had they been doing? They'd presumably just been relying on their own ability, whatever that might have been, or lack of ability, to try to deal with this menace.
Yeah, and of course they were the large ocean cruises, of course, were going through in a gaggle. So they had a certain amount of mutual protection from the fact that there were several yachts keeping more or less together. But what we were seeing with the commercial side of things was the Somalis were becoming increasingly successful at hijacking a vessel and then taking it down to the coast of Somalia and holding it there for ransom. So it was a relatively unique form of piracy. If you look around the rest of the world at the time, the majority of the piracy was maritime mugging. It was people getting on board to steal valuables. And Very rarely was there anything involving kidnapping of people or of the entire ship. We start to see that emerge as well in Nigeria at roughly the same time, but in a very different style, and it's a different form of maritime crime.
Gerry, can I just ask? You mentioned that quite a lot of yacht organisations called you and were requesting assistance. Was that something that you were geared up to do and could provide?
Well, we thought it was very interesting, really, because at the time you had a number of incidents where yachts had been taken by the Somali pirates. The ones that came to mind were French flag, and the French had acted very, very robustly, and they'd gone in and freed the captives. And then there was a yacht called the Tanit, and that was also captured by Somali pirates. The rescue team went in to rescue them. They were relatively successful, but very sadly, the skipper of the yacht and the owner was killed in the exchange. So it showed how dangerous the whole thing could be, and particularly once you start a firefight in a very small yacht, someone's going to get hurt badly. And of course, in this particular case, it was the owner of the vessel. So our advice was quite simply, whilst we're here to protect your right to do whatever you like, and by all means, if you want to go across the Indian Ocean in your yacht, we're not going to stand in your way, but we would strongly recommend you do not do so. We think you're mad. It just was becoming too dangerous.
Yeah, when we were talking to Rene, I believe you've heard the interview that we did with Rene on the previous podcast. He was saying that he was calling up people and calling up various navies for assistance, but didn't seem to get any. I was very, very well aware because I was talking to him about the prospect of doing this down in Phuket before he left. And I know that he contacted the Dutch Navy and they said, look, we're really strongly advising you not to do this. This is a bad idea. And Rene then basically decided to go anyway. And his thought is that, or I don't know if he was directly told that, and I know he did call the Dutch Navy, and they basically said, well, we've told you not to come here. Don't come crying to us now. Things are going wrong. I don't know if you feel that's credible or likely, or
it's quite possible. The thing is, there is a very well-worn process now, and we put that in place back in 2008, 2009, set it off. That process is what they call best management practice. And that was about us going to the shipping industry and saying, you need a set of self-protection measures. And we also need a set of procedures which people can follow. So back in early 2009, we set up a Maritime Security Centre, Horn of Africa. That's still in existence. And that is the reporting centre. That's where the shipping companies and anyone going through the region, before they arrive in the region, should be reporting in and saying, this is me, this is the nature of my vessel, and this is my plan. And the team at MSC Hoa will then risk assess that vessel. So if it's a tug that does 10 knots and clearly is very vulnerable with a low freeboard, that means that the ships that are out there, whatever they are, and the maritime patrol aircraft, if there are any, can keep an eye open for it. But you're not necessarily going to get an escort. What you're going to get is that you're going to attract more attention. Obviously, the large container vessel doing 20 knots with a relatively high freeboard is not going to be one that the military need to watch because it's not at risk. Anything that's doing more than 18 knots or with a high freeboard is low risk. Anything below that, you start to incrementally increase the risk of Somalis being able to successfully board you should they choose to come out and do that. And of course, back in those days, they were doing it a lot. So yachts are inherently vulnerable. And it wasn't that people were saying, well, we're not going to look after you if you do it. There was several incidences where yachts were attacked or were captured, and the military did do something about it. The Tanit is one example. There were others.
Yeah, I believe, coming back to Rene, he met the Chandlers, I think, on the trip down. And again, I think that was quite a way. They were quite a way into the Arabian Sea, or rather perhaps the North Indian Sea, but that was in a region they'd been strongly advised, I understand, on several occasions they shouldn't go into, and yet they did. And of course, you know, their story, I think that's recently become a film or something, hasn't it, Dick? Do you know about that?
There was a documentary on Netflix, and they did produce a book, which incurred quite a lot of wrath amongst the sailing community, because they were seen to have benefited from this, having been rescued. And that's only going to encourage, was the thinking, other piracy attacks. Their argument is, well, we're paying off the ransom.
Yeah, well, the counter-piracy task group that I ran in 2011, 2012 was in some ways a strengthened operation as a result of the Chalmers thing.
All right.
You know, and try and ensure that we had people in place who are capable of conducting a hostage rescue in the event that a similar incident, or UK nationals were taken hostage by the Somalis, i.e. something along the line of the Chandlers. And in fact, what we got used for was a lot of disruption of the Somalis along the coast of Somalia. And we were on hand to rescue the crew of the Italian freighter, the Monte Cristo, when she was captured by pirates. But the crew were able to retreat to the citadel, and we were able to get there before the pirates were able to break into the citadel and create the complete capture and hijack for themselves.
That's all very well if you've got a boat big enough to have a citadel, I guess.
Well, exactly. So it's really all about time, because the chances are the forces of law and order are not going to be immediately on hand. It's a big ocean, and there are very few ships out there and very few aircraft. So if you get attacked, you want to try and create as much time between the pirates being able to get on board your vessel and the military being able to get there as you possibly can. So, or try and reduce that period of time as much as you can. So, if you can, if as we saw in the beginning, a lot of ships were being pirated, and as the master was making the call, the pirates were climbing into the bridge. It's all over. If you can prevent them getting to you by retreating to a citadel or having an obstruction so they can't get on board, then you give the military time to intervene.
If prior to the citadel situation where the crew could all be safe, once the pirates had got on board, did you consider then that operation was lost, and you just, because of the risk of danger to the crew, I imagine?
Once they were on board and the crew were captured, you're now into a ransom situation. And bear in mind, this is criminality. This is not a war. The crew are by no means what we would describe as safe, but they are being held for a purpose, and that is to, as part of the ship and its cargo, to be sold back to the owner. And providing someone's prepared to pay for that, the crew, hopefully unharmed, will be returned. If you go in and conduct a hostage rescue at that point, there's every chance that the crew will be caught in the crossfire, and there'll be casualties. So no one wanted to get into the, and it was looked at on a number of occasions, and one or two nations did get very close to doing it to try and make an example, as we saw with the French. The French did do it for in some cases of yachts, but by and large, the policy was quite rightly at that point to leave it to the kidnap and ransom negotiators, the insurance people, the lawyers, and effectively what you're looking at is a form of a rather extravagant parking fine, really. Take a vessel like, say the Sirius Star back in at the end of 2008, a Saudi tanker with $100 million worth of cargo on board. They take it down to the coast of Somalia within the space of a few weeks, and ransoms negotiated, and for about $1 million, 1% of the cargo value, she's sent back to the owner.
So Gerry, the kind of, everybody knows that there's this whole big fuss about you should never pay a ransom, but from an insurer's point of view, that's always going to happen, simply because of the numbers you've just mentioned.
Well, you shouldn't pay ransoms to terrorists, and that's where I think that's where we find ourselves in a legal position, a difficult legal position. If you're captured by terrorists, you should not be paying ransoms. That puts you on the wrong side of the law. But in other situations where it is your property, it's extortion. Your property has now been sequestered by somebody who shouldn't really own it, but they do. So how are you going to get it back? Either you turn around and say, well, sorry, I'm not interested, you can keep it, which of course is what did happen in some instances, which of course left the crews in very, very difficult circumstances, and was really quite tragic for some of them. Or you negotiate a price.
So, Gerry, when you said earlier, which I found fascinating, you said it's not a war. And that's, of course, the key, I guess, because you're a military ship and you're going to the assistance of these people. But until it, well, it's not a war. So there's not much. Are you saying there's not much you can actually do as a military force?
Well, it's what the Americans in the past have referred to as the 3-block war, being able to operate at different levels. It's something navies, and particularly the Royal Navy, is very good at. You operate at a very high level against a complex threat. Whether that be the Russians, the Chinese, or whoever your enemy of the day might be. And at the other level, you're conducting what we used to call constabulary operations. So it's, in other words, you're conducting operations that are at a much lower level against largely criminality. There might actually be terrorism sitting behind it. So a lot of the operations in the Indian Ocean about catching drug runners, ships that are shifting drugs around the region, because that's a way of shifting men, terrorists, people, and other materials. And so you're operating against a much lower form of threat. And in the case of Somali pirates, they were criminals. They're not at war with them. They're criminals. And actually, so when we did pick them up, we conducted we did the evidence piece in accordance with the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So that whole collecting of evidence and statements and witness statements and making a proper case for a judge to look at was conducted. And if we couldn't do that, then actually we couldn't take them to court.
So if you couldn't do that, did you have to then call in the civil authorities of the country they were from or taken off, or were they involved in it?
But in the case of the,
I suppose there was no civil authorities in Puntland. I don't know.
Well, that's the legal finish, as they called it, was something which had to be developed at the time, because not with piracy having last been a real problem, several hundred years ago. A lot of nations' piracy laws are relatively out of date and therefore not as fit for purpose as they might be. The other thing is these crimes have been conducted in international waters against a variety of different flags. And if the flag state of the vessel is, say, Italian, now in the case of the Monte Cristo, which if it was an Italian flag, the Italian authorities said, yep, give them to us with all the evidence, all bagged up, nicely done. We gave the pirates to them and the evidence, and they took them back to Rome and they conducted a court case.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you that question. Who is it that actually tries them, and where are they tried?
Absolutely.
It's according to the flag, is it?
Yes, according to the. It starts with the flag state. Then, of course, but very often it's not a flag state that is prepared to do that. I mean, I think in the case of the Maersk Alabama, the pirates were tried back in the United States. The US prepared to do that. What the UK did was put a lot of weight and effort behind the UN ODC, and they set up. They negotiated with the Kenyans to conduct trials of Somali pirates, and they also negotiated with the Seychelles to do the same thing. And so when I was operating down off when we were operating down off the coast of Somalia, doing the counter-piracy task group work, we arrested quite a number of different pirate groups, and we took those across to the Seychelles, and they were all prosecuted in the Seychelles. But with the UNODC working behind the scenes to pay for it and make it all happen.
Right. That was the nearest body with a sort of court system.
Well, the UNODC was there to ensure that the resourcing was done, and then of course beyond that you've got where are they going to stay in prison, and of course what you don't want to do is silt up the Seychelles relatively small prison system with lots of Somali pirates. So they then created Western-style standard prisons in Somalia so that the pirates could spend a bit of time in the Seychelles, and then they'd be, or Kenya, and then they'd be taken to Somalia.
And the UN organised basically.
That was UN organised. But to the credit of the Seychelles, they recognised that Somali piracy in the Indian Ocean was a problem for them as well. They sit out there at a relatively strategic point. And the last thing they need is Somali piracy rampant around their shores. So they took it very seriously. And it also meant that I had, because it's a relatively small political system, the British High Commissioner there had very ready access to the president. If you want to see the Prime Minister of the UK, it's probably going to take you a while to get through the door of number 10. In his case, it was just go down, see the president. So I'd phone him up and say, look, I've got a bunch of pirates on board. I've got a pretty good case against them. What do you think? And he'd say, I'll go and talk to the president about it. And meanwhile, the Whitehall with the Foreign Office and all the rest of it would be way behind the curve on that, because they couldn't move fast. They couldn't move at that kind of speed.
That's a very, very interesting background. That
it is fascinating.
It's not, because it's all very well. All anybody ever focuses on is the actual piracy incident and how it was dealt with. But obviously, as you explained, there's a whole machination of situations that got to be dealt with afterwards. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yes, I mean that legal finish is very important. So people have always talked about the three-legged stool out there, which is the military, the best management practice, and then the armed guards. But in actual fact, it's a four-legged stool, which is the legal finish, and that is you put those four together, and the Somali piracy problem retreats.
Well, one thing I'd just like to ask you, Gerry, when we were again back to talking to Rene, he was quite convinced that there was very little collaboration between the various navies, or no. In fact, he claimed that there was no collaboration between them, and you had to call up one, and you had to call up another, and you had to call up another, and everybody was completely working independently and without reference to each other. It sounds like, for what you're saying, that's maybe not exactly the case.
No, and BMP, Best Management Practice, which is now in its 5th edition, and it's a global BMP rather than just specifically Indian Ocean. But it's very clear about what you should do. It's very clear about calling MSC HOA and registering the vessel's details so that a risk assessment can be taken against you. And then once you're inside the high-risk area, you should be talking to and listening to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Organization, UKMTO, which is based in Dubai. And if something happens, they're your first point of call. If you look back to the film of the Maersk Alabama and the Captain Phillips film, when they call the authorities to say we're being attacked by pirates, it's UKMTO, slightly dressed up version of what UKMTO looks like for the sake of the film. But that's UKMTO they're talking to. And UKMTO will then disseminate the message out to the different force commanders, and they will make sure that any ship that's in the area is able to attend to that emergency.
Irrespective of that ship's, nation, whichever nation that ship was from, it wasn't there.
I would say irrespective, because although some ships are specifically assigned to the counter-piracy mission, there will be other ships there which might be passing through. They might be transiting to get to a different mission or a different place. So, an emergency at sea is something that we all know, we all deal with. It's a safety of life issue. And so people will deal with it. And there are several instances where the ships involved and first on the scene were not necessarily those that had been dedicated toward the counter-piracy mission, but were doing something else at the time.
Okay.
So any yachtsman, Gerry, in that area, even before they get there, or even if they're not under attack, should call. I mean, can they call the UKMTO and say, "Look, what's your advice?" Yeah.
Yep. They can, and they can advise the UKMTA that they're coming through. They can talk to MSC HOA as well. Read BMP5. Okay. It's a good document, and it's been really well thought through by the shipping industry in collaboration with the military, the insurance people, the lawyers. It's a really good piece of work. And as I say, it's now global, so it's relevant to security issues worldwide. It might not be quite as detailed for other parts of the world as it is for the Indian Ocean, because the Indian Ocean is quite specific. But
Gerry, could you just break that down?
BMP, Best Management Practice.
Right. Thank you.
Best Management Practice 5. You can Google it and it will come up, and you can download the PDF.
Brilliant.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thanks. That's really, really helpful. And I'm sure the listeners would love to hear. I don't know if there is a typical incident that you could describe and just say, how it developed and tell us a bit about that. Could you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the Italian freighter, the Monte Cristo, is a good example because it demonstrates how distance and time is your enemy if you're in a situation where you are attacked by Somali pirates. In this particular instance, she was a very new Italian freighter, not long out of the builder's yard, which was to her advantage because she had a lot of fire retardant materials built into her superstructure, and she was a bulk carrier doing about 14 knots. In her case, the best management practice measures, the self-protection measures, the barbed wire around the upper deck, they were excellent, really good. Rolls and rolls of barbed wire, all well organized and managed, held together with high tensile cable around the upper deck. She had a good citadel or safe area for the crew, which was the engine room and the steering gear compartment, which was with separate steel doors, temporary steel doors that they could put in place to further bolster their security and prevent break into those compartments. And they could control the ship from the citadel. And she had an unarmed team of unarmed security team of Italians on board, and a mixed crew, mostly Eastern Europeans and an Italian skipper, I think. So she was pirated or boarded by Somali pirates pretty much right bang smack in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And the nearest military ships to her, which was the group that I was in command of, the ship I had as my command platform, the RFA Fort Victoria, and a US frigate, the Divert. We were off the Horn of Africa, close in on the coast of the Horn of Africa. But we were 330 miles away, and we were the nearest ships to her when she was pirated. And she went very quiet on AIS, but the owners could still see her signal, her satellite positioning signal. And you could see that she was going around in circles for a bit. And then she straightened out after a while, and she came back up to 14 knots, maximum speed, and started heading, roughly speaking, towards Salalah. So we concluded from that she had been taken over by the pirates, but that the crew had probably made it to the citadel.
And Gerry, can I just interpose there? The fact she was going around in circles would suggest they'd gone into the citadel. Is that it?
Well, that was the fact the pirates had taken over the ship. Right. And then there was obviously some confused manoeuvring going on. In fact, what in fact happened was that the crew made it to the citadel without their handheld communications, right. So they couldn't talk to anybody. And for a period, the pirates had control of the ship from the bridge, right. And the crew were able to remove that control. And once they removed that control from the bridge and they controlled the vessel from the engine room, then she steadied on a course towards Salalah, with the crew in the citadel and the pirates now on board. Unfortunately, the pirates hadn't been terribly good at tying their knots, or their rope hadn't been very reliable, and they'd lost their skiff. It had been tied to the stern, and the skiff had come away. So the pirates were effectively marooned on board the vessel, and their mother vessel, their mothership, which was a Arab dhow, which they'd stolen, was unable to keep up. So the pirates now are in a bit of a do-or-die situation. Either they get into that citadel and take over the vessel, or they're going to be taken all the way to Salalah. We're in a situation now where the pirates are desperately trying to break into the citadel. So they're setting fire to everything they can. And of course, but being a new ship with fire retardant materials, none of their fires really held. But they were trying everything they could to break into the citadel. In the meanwhile, we with the US frigate Divert headed up the track. I had a team on board that were there specifically for hostage rescues of this nature. Because whereas if we knew the crew was safe, then of course it was just a simple matter then of dealing with the Somalis. I mean, it could be dangerous, but we had a lot of overmatch.
A simple matter might be a bit of an understatement.
Yeah. But we had a lot of overmatch in terms of a helicopter with a sniper on board. So you had the sort of top-down look, and then a well resourced team to get on board the vessel and take it back over. And of course, time is now the issue, because if the Somalis were able to break into the citadel, then it's game over. Then the vessel is hijacked, and we're into a hijack and ransom situation. There's not much we can do about that. So we got there when we arrived, or when first of all the Divert arrived. She was a bit quicker. She got there. The Italian security team, the unarmed security team, had been running up and down into the funnel, so they were able to look down on the vessel. They were able to take photographs of the Somalis, which was great because that was good evidence for later on. They had some listening devices out so they could hear what they were up to, and they also communicated by putting a message into a bottle with an EPIRB on the end of the bottle, and they chucked that from the top of the funnel into the water. Nice flat, calm day, fortunately. And the Divert went over, picked up the bottle, and inside was a message saying, Somali pirates are on board. Crew of however many it was, 22, I think, all safe in the citadel. Please come and help.
So that was vital, because that then told you they are in the citadel, and otherwise you wouldn't have known that, and that would have given you a certain amount of reticence. But since you got the EPIRB in the bottle and you knew what was going on, you could then basically send in the team, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was the important thing is knowing the crew was safe, so they weren't going to get caught in any crossfire. And then it's just quite simply a case of arresting the Somalis. And once the Somalis realised they're completely overmatched, they became a great deal more compliant.
Did you send the rescue team in? How many guys would it be going in, and would they go in by helicopter or boat? Or
what we had is the helicopter over the top. You have the ships next to them, the snipers. The Somalis then actually at that point realised the game was up, and they went and sat in the corner where they were, and then the team, the boarding team itself, climbed on board. Not an easy job when you're quite heavily armoured and you've got body armor and everything else, and a lot of barbed wire to get through. And this is where the slight irony, of course, we had to cut our way in. Then afterwards, we looked around to see how the Somalis had got on board, and you could see where they'd come through the rolls of barbed wire by just gently parting it and climbing their way through. And they'd all come on board that way, probably without a scratch. And that was two good rolls, well arranged of barbed wire.
And this was a ship, to get back to your earlier categorization of risk, this was a ship that was seen not to be a risk, a big ship, high topsides, could do 14 knots, and yet they attacked her.
Well, she had good I'd say she was up there with sort of a medium risk.
Right.
She had something like a 6 or 7 meter freeboard. So at the top end of what you would expect the Somalis to be able to get on board, a speed of 14 knots, so still within the vulnerable speed area. But she had all the BMP measures, the self-protection measures. Had she had an armed team, the pirates wouldn't have got on board. The fact that they were able to get to the citadel and stay there until someone helped them was the critical piece here. Now, the thing is, of course, that took us 33 hours to get to her because of the distance. She was right out there in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Yeah. Now, there were several other vessels that were boarded by pirates in the southern Red Sea, in a similar period, actually earlier in 2011. And in each instance, the crew had been able to retreat to the citadel. And of course, within the space of a couple of hours, the military were able to come and assist. And because the pirates knew that the military were in relatively close proximity, they had run around the ship for a bit, realized the crew were in the citadel, and they got off. They realized the game was up, and off they went.
Was perhaps recognition on their part that up at the Red Sea end, they haven't got so much time to get organised? Is that what caused them to migrate further out and onto with the mothership operations and stuff into the northern Indian Ocean?
Well, they were already doing that because as soon as we set up the patrols in the Gulf of Aden back in end of 2008, 2009, and the international recognised transit corridor was run straight through the middle of the Gulf of Aden as another measure to make the ships a bit safer. The pirates realised that the Gulf of Aden was becoming difficult, and so they moved down into the Indian Ocean off the coast of Somalia. So that's the point in 2009 where you see, if you like, you squeeze the balloon in the area of the Gulf of Aden, and funny old thing, they've all moved further out. And in fact, you then start to see Somali piracy moving further and further offshore. And it's a result of that. But in the early days, you didn't see it in the southern Red Sea. In fact, people were very skeptical there was ever going to be a problem in the southern Red Sea. But there was, and in some ways, it's an area that is relatively easy for maritime criminals to operate from, because there's lots of little offshore islands and places to go and sit and hide while you're waiting to do the job. So in early 2011, you see Somali pirates attacking ships in the southern Red Sea, but the citadel is what saves those vessels. About 4 of them, I think, where the citadel works very well for the crew, and the Somalis just get on and they get off. In the case of Monte Cristo, of course, they had no choice. They couldn't get off because they'd lost their boat. Another vessel, the Pacific Express, further down towards the southern end of Somalia, was attacked. The crew went into the citadel. The Somalis were successful in setting light to the superstructure, not to specifically burn the superstructure, to try and burn the crew out of the citadel or smoke them out of the citadel.
Yeah.
The fire got out of hand, and the Somalis then got off. And so by the time that a Italian warship arrived to rescue the vessel, she was a blazing wreck. The crew were safe; they all got off safely, but the ship was a blazing wreck, and there were no Somalis there either. So that was a very deliberate attempt by the Somalis to break into the citadel, and it got very out of hand.
And Gerry, did you ever, in all of that operation, did you go to the assistance of any yachts, and if you did, how did that all work?
No, because we didn't see any yachts. There were no yachts.
Right.
In 2011, 2012, there were no yachts at all out there that we came across anyway.
Except apparently Rene, or so it would seem. He went up there in 2011. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's I don't know whether his was earlier in the year, but I mean, clearly there was some yacht stuff going on, but most of the business I was doing at that time was down off the coast of Somalia itself, or around the coast of Somalia, and we only really passed through the other parts of the area to get ourselves to and from our base up in Dubai.
Did you actually talk to any of the pirates, Gerry? Did you?
Yeah.
We were partly involved in interrogations and things.
We had them on board as guests for
Right.
some period.
Yeah.
After the various takedowns that we were involved in. So and there were several groups of them that we captured. I think we captured or detained for successful prosecution. I think something in the region of 40 pirates.
All right.
In 3 different groups, I think. 2 went through the Seychelles and 1 went to Rome.
All right.
And then we had quite a few others that we didn't have sufficient evidence.
Okay.
So we sent them back to Somalia.
The reason I asked that, Gerry, is that, I've read, and I'm sure others have read, that the Somali piracy issue in particular started because their fishing grounds were being exploited by large sort of fish factory trawlers from other nations. And they turned to piracy as a result of that. And I just wondered, what your views were on that, and whether you had any sympathy at all for these guys.
Well, I think most people would say that there's a certain amount of myth about that. It provides them with a justification. It provides them with their sort of Robin Hood.
Yes.
Having said that, there is some truth in the fact that there is overfishing in the Indian Ocean, and there are these big trawler fleets, whether they be there's the French and the Spanish fleets that go around fishing for tuna, big net fishermen. And then you've got others, Taiwanese and various Far Eastern fishermen who are out there. And of course, because Somalia is it's essentially a failed state.
Yes.
There is no proper fishing regime around its coast. There's no one to license it, protect it.
Right.
And so it is a bit of a free-for-all. So there is a certain case that there's overfishing, and the toxic waste dumping. There's been a lot of talk about that for years and years. We in fact said to the Somalis in the London Somali community, we spoke to them one Saturday afternoon back in early 2009, when we were setting up EU NAVFOR, and we said, look, we'd like to talk to you guys, and because we want to understand what's going on. And they talked about toxic waste dumping, and we said, look, if you can point to any evidence of it, we will try and deal with it. It's not something, and the same with the fishing. If there's any evidence of it at all, then it is something we will try and deal with.
So you're not clear whether actually that was just a diverting story or was true, but in any case, it didn't get anywhere.
Well, I think there might be. It's quite possible there is some truth to it. We know there's overfishing.
Sure.
We know that overfishing around the world is rife, and it's another subject in its entire right, and it's something we should all be very worried about, along with all the other environmental concerns that we have. Toxic waste dumping, it is quite possible. It's very difficult to say. I mean, the fact that people talk about it means that they probably haven't entirely made it up. But is it the reason why they turned to piracy? No. Now, the reason they turned to piracy is because they could.
Yeah.
Because actually, they, over a period of time, which started quite early in the early 2000s, they, through various issues that were running with World Food Program ships and really mostly Somali on Somali problems, they discovered that actually there was a successful business model to be developed in hijacking a vessel, holding it for a period, and getting the owner to buy it back. And we saw over a period of time, and I was involved in various operations back in the sort of early 2000s, where we saw over time that the ransom figures were slowly going up. They were putting in for these ridiculous sums, like you could hear you could hear that they were asking for $500,000 or $600,000 to give a vessel back, and we all laughed. Thought, oh, it'll be more like 60 or 70,000 or whatever the figure was. But that was the beginning, and then they discovered that actually they could go and take any commercial vessel. Once they've done that early groundwork, in 2008, you then start to see them hijacking commercial vessels in the Gulf of Aden, and the ransom figures start to go up massively, and then we're starting to talk millions. But actually, at the beginning, even in 2008, that figure of $1 million for the Sirius Star, that's a relatively small ransom, because later on the ransom figures are averaging 5 or 6 million.
Oh, right. Were they? Wow. So no wonder it became a properly developed industry within Somalia. And Gerry, I mean, obviously we've got very much you and all of your colleagues and various navies around the world collaborated together, as you've just said, to largely eliminate piracy in that area. And my understanding is that as a result of your actions, by the time we got to sort of 2013, 14, it was much reduced. But I think I understand it's because of the problems in Yemen now, it's rearing its head again. I don't know if it's to the same level, but can you tell us about that?
Well, it's the last time a major commercial vessel was hijacked was 2012. Since then, there have been a number of fishing vessels that have been hijacked. So it's more regional type stuff. And there's been a number of attempts, and one or two of those attempts over the years have come quite close to a successful hijack. But we haven't actually seen a hijack of a commercial vessel. And the number of attacks in the last few years has not been great. In fact, the last couple of years there's been hardly anything at all. The question there, so there's two questions there. What's going on? Why aren't they trying a bit harder? Have they given up altogether? But if they haven't given up altogether, and there's still that potential they might do it. If they did do it, would they have the same permissive environment along the coast of Somalia by which they could take a vessel down there and hold it whilst the ransom's negotiated? The general consensus at the moment is that permissive environment still exists. So if a team of Somalis were to go out and successfully hijack a vessel, we think they would be able to take it down to the coast of Somalia and hold it there while the ransom's negotiated, because there's no forces of law and order on the shore side that would come and intervene and prevent them doing that. And that's the key issue. And that's what's always made Somali piracy quite unique, in that there is no shoreside security that will prevent that ransom negotiation taking place. So that's the first part. The second part really is, okay, so why are they not proving to be more active? Well, it's partly because of the military patrols, the BMP measures, the private security. But it's also because there is a significant conflict going on in the Yemen. And the Yemeni economy and the Somali economy are only separated by a bit of water. It's a fairly sizable piece of water, but it's nevertheless just a bit of water. And they are effectively one and the same, in many respects, one and the same economy. And so the people who were involved at the top end of Somali piracy, what they call the investors, have got plenty to get on with in terms of business lines of activity running into and out of Yemen, whether it's weapon smuggling, fuel smuggling, people, or other more legitimate things. It doesn't really matter. The fact is, there is plenty going on, and I think that is what is that's one of the things that might be keeping them diverted from needing to go out and do the Somali piracy thing. And the other thing I think is that they had a jolly good go at Somali piracy. They were very successful at it for a period. And then it started to become rather dangerous for them. An awful lot of young boys went out there in their skiffs and their whalers and capturing dhows and hoofing around the Indian Ocean, and they ended up in jail, or they ended up marooned at sea and died of lack of water and food. And so the casualty rate really was quite high in the end for them. And so that will have eventually the risk reward ratio started to slip away from them.
So do you consider that region from a yacht's perspective? Do you consider that relatively safe now, or how do you feel about it?
I think it's a very difficult one to quantify, because threat is about capability and intent. We know the capability is there. It's the intent which has the large question mark over it. And it's not just whether that's some Somalis coming out from the north coast of Somalia and heading into the Gulf of Aden to actually head across to Yemen and do something, but on the way back to moonlight and have a go at some piracy if they think they can get away with it. But it's also because as you come down through the Straits of Bab el Mandeb, there's been all kinds of activity in that area. Whether it's the Houthis firing missiles or putting mines in the water, or radio-controlled boats against the Saudis. So there's all sorts of activity there. And of course, then there's just the general level of small-time criminality. And so it might not be that you're going to get captured in the way that the Somalis would do it, but somebody who comes on board your boat and steals your valuables at the point of a gun is a distinct possibility in that region. And once you get into that southern Red Sea area, the distances are very small. Though it's the coastal traffic that crisscrosses that area is in a pretty good position to do something, to divert itself from whatever it's doing against something like a yacht. And of course, you're very slow moving, and you've got a very low freeboard, so you're easy to board.
Thank you for lending us your ears. We do appreciate it. If you want to read any of the stories in Ocean Sailor magazine, and there's now a year's worth of magazines packed with, I hope, useful information, we're pretty certain it is useful, then you can find all of that on oceansailormagazine.com. Well, that was fascinating. Gerry Northwood, what a guy. I mean, I'm amazed, really, he bared so much of his soul that he did. And it was his soul that he bared, really. And what I've learned from it, I'm sure you're the same, Dick, is that, okay, you can arrest these pirates, you put them in cuffs, stick them down in the Lazarete and sail off, knowing that the seas are a bit safer. But then what do you do with them? I mean, the process of the legal finish, as Gerry rather nicely put it, is another thing altogether, is it not?
Do you know, Dick, I mean, once he started to tell that story, the penny drops, doesn't it? Okay, right. So we've got all these guys. Now what do we do with them? And who's going to take them? And they're bits of this whole intrigue and story that really I never even gave a thought to. But it was absolutely brilliant. And, as you say, bared his soul. I mean, he certainly did. He's quite a cool hand, Luke, this guy.
He is a cool hand, Luke, yeah.
And you know what? He's the main man, Dick.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's a great scout for us to have on our early days of the Ocean Sailor podcast, because there's no question Gerry was the main man.
And that was just part one. I mean, there's another full podcast to come from Gerry.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've to use the phrase, we've only really seen the tip of the iceberg of this whole issue and what has been done by the nations of the world to counter it. I mean, obviously what we've discussed so far has almost exclusively been discussing the area that our previous guest, Rene, sailed through. And, there's lots more. And in part two, I think, everybody's going to really, really get some great information.
Well, there is some good information. I hope that listeners will find it useful, because what I wasn't aware of was that check-in that Gerry mentioned in the Gulf of Aden, where everyone should check in, before they get there, and if they're going and what sort of boat they have. That's very useful.
It certainly is. I mean, and we'll hear more about it. But you brought up the subject of whether this whole piracy problem had been caused or even exacerbated by Somali waters being plundered by international fishing fleets, which he didn't. He seemed to think that was really a bit of a myth that they were trying to blame it on.
Yes.
But it was quite obvious he was very interested in that. And of course, he did bring up the subject that, again, another thing I had not even really thought about is in rogue states or states where the whole political system is broken down, that leaves the door wide open for toxic waste dumping, which is something he was very interested in.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, exploitation of weak constitutions, just taking the big bucks to buy more guns or whatever.
Or not even, Dick. I don't even think it's probably that. I think it's just the fact that they've got no Coast Guard, they've got no Navy. So,
it's just dumped anyway, you mean?
Here you go. Nobody about, 200 miles from land, whoosh, over the side it goes. Who's going to track it?
No, that's true enough.
And I mean, of course, that's a subject that we're going to cover, or we're discussing in next Ocean Sailor magazine. You've put forward the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy on Mariner's Library, and that's been a massive eye-opener as well. And it does actually splice together quite a bit with some of the things that Gerry has hinted at so far, but we'll perhaps get him to reveal more.
Well, that's right. Well, that would be very interesting. It's opened the debate. It's quite a contentious documentary. It's had a lot of criticism for being a bit too simplistic, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But it doesn't matter. It's raised a debate, and as you say, maybe Gerry will come back and tell us a bit about his experience of that in another issue.
Dick, as you know, I've been alive. Not only have I been a lifetime sailor, but I have also been a lifetime diver, and the degradation that is caused by trawling is it is heartbreaking, because you can dive a beautiful area where it's got a fantastic infrastructure of small invertebrates and corals and plumosa anemones and everything else, and then you can suddenly find yourself swimming across what appears to be a desert, and you can see the trawl marks. And, we just can't keep doing this to the planet. I know, it's an emotive subject for me, something I'm very, very concerned about. And, of course, that's just one small issue. What else we got coming up, Dick, in the next Ocean Sailor?
Well, of course, we've got the fantastic near completion of the K50 with Tristan Grace's great pictures. I mean, this is a very exciting moment for Kraken, of course. And for all of us who believe in the project, because this is the new version, the version 2, and I think you've been talking to some of the lads at the boatyard.
Well, it's massive for us at Kraken. It's massive. There's two aspects of this. One you've already touched on, which is that it is version 2. And we've been able to go back and look at the design, tweak the design in some areas, change them quite a lot in others, to improve them. In particular, White Dragon, as you know, the first Kraken 66 features this beautiful full wraparound saloon window, which is in very sexy black glass. It really looks magic, I can tell you, which people refer to as Ray-Ban glasses, the big Ray-Ban sunglasses, which we came away from a little bit under the previous the Hong Kong management.
So the JIC, the wraparound, the Ray-Bans, which is a unique feature of all Krakens, when they were built in Hong Kong, they were a little bit compromised, I think, with pillars. You've gone back to
mullions,
mullions, yes.
I wanted, and Kevin Dibley, our designer, wanted to emulate the wraparound saloon window, which is actually an iconic feature of Kraken yachts. I was very upset when I found out it had been changed, I might tell you. But we've brought that back in the version 2. And the point anyway, I mean, don't want to labour the point too much, or perhaps really I do, because it's so important, this launch for us at Kraken. But Tristan has been doing his penultimate Birth of a Blue Water Yacht series, and guys, you got to look out for this. It's fantastic.
I'm looking forward to seeing the complete set of photographs. I've seen one or two. It's very exciting. So what else have we got? Well, we've got for travel, the travel pieces on the Bahamas. And what I didn't know was that a lot of people go to the Bahamas and build their dream home and then find out that it's a bit of a nightmare for various reasons, either political or money runs out or whatever. And the islands, of which there are 700 in total, are littered with abandoned properties. So it's a bit of a strange thing, but people sail there and then go and have a look around these old houses. There you go.
It's a sailing cruise around a ghost town,
or
several ghost towns. But of course, what this article exposes is some of the islands that are much less visited and are still pristine and beautiful. And I'm in the process of finalising an article about the areas of the world that are still susceptible to piracy and the emerging areas, because Somalia is dropping down as a threat to yachts. Not, by the way, and I say that strongly, not at all that we are suggesting that it's a good place to travel and sail through yet. Let's hope it does become that. But there's too much, as Gerry's pointed out,
too much in doubt still.
Too much political instability for it to be anything other than still
a go-to
risky
destination. Yeah,
yeah. But there's other places emerging, and I'm going to cover that in a big article about areas around the world. And what is particularly obvious when you see the chart of the world, which we've done, Tristan and I have been developing. Actually, it's such a tiny part of the world that is actually affected by piracy. Yeah, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to say, oh, well, never mind, I'll go there anyway, because you can easily sail past all of it. And why wouldn't you? And that's definitely my attitude. And we've also got Morgan Grace is doing his another great article on maintaining and keeping records of checklists of boats, and I very much agree with him and believe in that. And of course, being an airline pilot is particularly important that all those checks are carried on.
Sure.
And of course, he's not doing too much flying at the moment.
I mean, what I liked about his checklist was it came to an end. I used to sail with a guy who started a list in January about getting his boat ready for launch in sort of Easter time. And it went on, and Easter came, and the list was like a josser full of things he had to do. And in the end, I realised he was just making this list. He was never actually going to launch. He just kept adding things to his list.
Yeah, well, there's no such thing as a finished boat, is there, Dick?
No,
doesn't matter.
Enough.
There is, I'm a your point. I've known a lot of people that have done that. There's always a good reason to stay on the land.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's an awful lot of people that set to sea, given that they've given a date and then they're going to go anyway.
Yeah,
and that's a mistake too. I can tell you, I always had two lists, which was must do and like to do.
Fair enough.
And I wouldn't ever go to sea with must do lists, items outstanding. But I often went to sea with like to do's outstanding and promised myself I was going to get them done. But of course, they always get overcome by must do's,
because more of those crop up as you go, of course. And we've also got our look at other boats that are not necessarily new. In other words, pre-loved, pre-owned, secondhand, call it what you will. But there are a lot of boats out there which fit our principles of an integral keel, a fully protected rudder, and a heavily laid up hull. For those who can't afford a brand new Kraken.
Yes, of course. Well,
there are some.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that was the question the lady asked us in the readers' questions. And it's valid. What, as you know, we found, I knew we were going to find this anyway, because that's why I founded Kraken Yachts in the first place, because nobody was building the right kind of boats anymore. But what we found is that in Europe, to get the right kind of a boat for ocean passage making, with the three issues that you've said, well laid up hull, integral hull and keel, and fully protected rudder, you've got to go back to pre-80s.
Yeah.
And that's not quite the same in the States. I'm not quite sure why that is, except for the fact that I think the production boat market, which is primarily French driven, but certainly European, but the production boat market has affected, or did affect, America a lot less than it affected Europe. And the Bob Perry designs that we know and love also, Dick, they still were in production really until about 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
So, you know, there's boats in America that people can buy. And there's a few boats. It's been hard to find, as you know. We've been asking Kevin Dibley, our New Zealand designer, to tell us about some boats that fit that criteria, built in New Zealand or Australia. And so far, we've tracked down two designs. Funnily enough, even then, most of those boats that were originally built pre-80 are still around, are still sailing, and there's some on the market. So that goes to tell you a lot, doesn't it? I wonder how many production boats are still going to be sailing around this world 30, 40 years' time.
Well, I'll lay money, not many. They'll be crushed up and used as road construction material, which is what they do with old fiberglass boats down in Portsmouth. But yes, no, that's interesting. I've looked at some of the boats that you've picked out, Dick, and found them very interesting. And I hope you found some of the ones I picked out interesting as well. Yeah,
I did. It was a good collaboration, Dick. I think we both found different things. Boats that, funny enough, a lot of times the same boats appeared on both our lists, didn't they?
Yes, indeed. That's right.
Contessa, Nicholson 32. I mean, they're boats that you're never going to knock. It doesn't matter how old they are. They're still beautiful. They'll still sail across oceans when they're 100 years old. Yeah. Much like your own, Dickie, which is 100 years old. Well, Betty too's 100
she is
years
100 years old this year. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, start with good foundations and what you got last year. That's particularly important when you're sailing across oceans out there in big seas.
Yeah.
So anyway, look.
There we are then.
There we are. That's it. It's been great fun again, Dick.
Good stuff.
Nice I suppose it's time for one of your very interesting sign-offs.
Yeah, perish the thought. All I'm going to say is that the skipper's telescope of omniscience has been clouded over by the pirate's eye patch of glaucoma. So it's shut eye from me and shut eye from you.
Oh my God. You're really clutching at the old straws with that one, aren't you?
That is really dreadful, isn't it?
Oh dear. Fantastic. I'm just going to say good night.
Yeah. Bye-bye.